Today's panel is going to be Get to Know Your UCSB First Gen Staff and Leaders. So our panelists today, it's Itzi Canales from Marketing and Communications Coordinator Summer Session, Kristin Mihami from Counselor/Coordinator of the Educational Opportunity Program, or more formally known as EOP, and Joe Sabado from Associate Chief Information Office of Student Affairs Executive Director of the Student Information Systems and Technology, or more formally known as SIST. So before we start, we encourage you to sign in. They will be adding the link in the chat. If you could please sign in just to make sure we know everyone is here. Okay, and so we're going to welcome our panelists. So if any of you would like to start, feel free. You're just going to introduce yourself, your role at UCSB, and share a bit about your educational career. If anyone would like to start?
Hi everyone, my name is Kristin Mihami. I use she, her pronouns. Currently I work in the Educational Opportunity Program, otherwise known as EOP. As was mentioned, we do serve first-gen income-eligible students, so if you all haven't heard of us yet, feel free to stop by, make an appointment with us. We're always happy to support you in your journeys at UCSB. I've worked in EOP, and I work in EOP, as a counselor and coordinator of the Asian Resource Center. I've been working there for a little less than a year now. But prior to my role there, I've worked in care for about 2 years, working to support survivors of trauma and interpersonal violence. So I think I'm coming up on my 3-year anniversary with UCSB pretty soon, within the next month or so. So that's my current role at UCSB. I think, I guess my educational journey. So I am a first-gen student, unfortunately not of UCSB, not an alum, but I am a graduate of UC Irvine, graduated there with a major in psych and social behavior, took a year off and then decided to get my master's in higher education and student affairs at the University of San Francisco. I will say that I think both really my educational journey and my personal life has really informed my passion and interest in supporting first-gen students, as well as survivors and really all folks who hold marginalized identities. I think my work in care and my work in EOP are really informed by not only my trauma-informed lens, but we really take a holistic approach in our office in EOP in providing not only the academic support, but really for all needs, knowing that all of our experiences as first-gen students and staff are very varied and different. And so just wanted to express that we're all here for you and we're all here to support you all in your journeys here. But yeah, I think I'll turn it over to my fellow panelists to share a little bit more about themselves.
I can go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Itzi Canales. So I graduated from UCSB 2011, and I originally entered as a communication major. I thought I wanted to do broadcast journaling, although I wasn't very aware of UC was so research based. So unfortunately I didn't do as well in my communication classes as I planned. And communication was a 3.0 GPA. So unfortunately I was so close, but I got a 2.95. And at that time I didn't know that you can actually appeal and do all those things. But luckily I had taken some sociology classes and became very passionate about sociology and switched into that major, and I graduated 2015 as a social major and applied psychology minor. And it all came full circle because now I am doing marketing, which is what I thought I was going to do with my communication degree. So a lot of internships did help me get to where I am today. I started in the chemistry department as a programs assistant. I knew I wanted to work in higher ed. I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to help people with figuring out those things that I wasn't able to figure out, like appealing and just asking for help and taking advantage of the resources. So I really wanted to help students, specifically students of color. So luckily in 2019 or 2018, I applied for a position at the Multicultural Center as a marketing coordinator there. And I got the position, and it was my first marketing role, a career role. So that was really exciting. But most recently, I accepted a position at Summer Sessions as a communications coordinator. So it's just come full circle. But like Kristin said, we're here to support you in any way that we can. And being first gen, it wasn't the most luxurious time. I don't think my undergrad was as fun as some of my colleagues and classmates, but I made it. I'm here, so I'm really happy to share this space with y'all.
Thank you, Itzy. Well, welcome everyone. Welcome to be. My name is Joe Sabado. I go by he, him, his. Some students at UCSB call me Uncle Joe or Tito Joe, which is a Tagalog for uncle. My family and I immigrated to the United States in 1984. This was in Salinas, California. My grandparents were farm workers, and they picked up lettuce and onions and the very hot fields and very cold fields and sometimes rainy fields of Salinas. And so they were the one who petitioned us to come to the United States. My parents, growing up, they worked multiple jobs at a time. My mom worked for fast food restaurants, and same time working in stock rooms like JCPenney's. And my dad, he was a mall janitor for that big mall in Salinas. And at the same time, he owned his window cleaning business with my mom. And he also, I don't know how he did this, but on his days off, he also mowed lawns. So to this day, I still don't know how my parents did that, but I'm grateful for that opportunity. So they sacrificed a lot. And I was the first person to attend a university. That was a dream. So I was the first one, and that university is UC Santa Barbara. So I came in 1991, but I officially graduated in 1997, which is a story I can tell later on. I came in as econ major, and then I graduated as political science major with a minor in Asian American studies. It took me about 17 years to go back and get my master's. It's master's in business administration at this online college called Capella University. This was, I entered that in 2016, 14, and then graduated in 2016. So my role at UCSB, I am, as I think Laura said earlier, I am the Associate CIO, or Chief Information Officer for Student Affairs. So my team and our responsibilities are for making sure that the over 180 applications are working and secure and effective for you all. And those applications are used by 25,000 students, including you, faculty and staff. And in this last year, I think there were about 110,000 applicants. So some of you have already used, or most of you, all of you have already used some of those applications, like admissions, where you submitted your SIR, Gold, where you register for your classes, and financial aid, where you check your grants and awards. So here's a little trivia for you. I was actually one of the 3 people who developed Gold in 1998. So that's Gold on the web. So now you can tell your friends that you actually met one of the people that invented Gold on the web in 1998. So there's a little trivia for you. So work history-wise, my first job when I graduated was UCSB. So I became the first web developer, full-time web developer at UCSB. I did leave twice. I tried the corporate world, I tried the startup world, I did consulting on my own. But really, what I found was my passion, the most joy and most fulfilling jobs that I ever had and being around is being with students and helping students in a higher ed. And so ultimately, I decided to come back to UCSB. And so in addition to my CIO role, associate CIO role, I've also served students in many, many ways at UCSB the last 20 years. So for one, I'm a mentor to a lot of students, student leaders along the years. I'm also the staff advisor for the Filipinx American student organizations like Kapatirang Filipino, Filipino Cultural Night, Filipino Graduations, and other organizations. And I know that hopefully, give a shout out to some of my STEP students this year. So I think some of you may be here. So I had a pleasure of doing my, I think, 9th step facilitation this year. So it was a different experience, but it was a fun experience as always. And so, so that's pretty much, in addition to my IT role, I do a lot of mentoring, especially for first generation and underrepresented students. So, I think of myself as an educator, one who really advocates for students, and someone who, aspires to be a possibility model. And what that means is that, I don't see myself as a role model because I think every single one of you have your own path, you have your own challenges and opportunities. But I do, I take great pride in the sense that you look at me, you look at, folks in this panel, the host, and look at us and say, you know what, maybe someday, we could be in that position as well. So again, I can consider myself as possibly a model for you folks, someone who's persisted, who's overcome imposter syndrome, who's overcome all the struggles we have. And so, here I am, with the privilege of speaking in front of you. So thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really nice to get to know you guys. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions to each of the panelists. So the first question is, what was your experience as a first-gen college student?
I can start this one off. So my experience, like I expressed before, it was quite challenging. It wasn't as glamorous as I hoped. I feel like the first year was fun because I didn't know what I was in for, but it was a lot of hard work because even, applying to colleges without support from your parents, because my parents only spoke Spanish, and it was, although they supported me emotionally, I felt like there was a lot of labor and a lot of unlearning that I had to do to be on my own and know that my parents were going to be okay on their own, my younger siblings were going to be okay. So it was a big shift of independence. I came from a very strict family, so I thought I was going to get a bunch of freedom, and little did I know that I needed to be very self-disciplined and very responsible. I was working full-time to help pay for college and pay for rent. So it was hard balancing a big, heavy workload. And I think that was part of the reason why I didn't get into the communication major. I couldn't devote as much time into, making networking, making relationships with my professors, going to office hours. So fortunately, I kind of learned to adapt by the second year. Once I got into my social major, I felt a lot more equipped, but it was hard. And I think something that I will share is that at the same time, although I wasn't making relationships with my classmates, I was working, and I feel like that helped give me a sense of independence and know my money's worth, and kind of make my parents proud too, because they didn't have to kind of sacrifice as much as they would have, because we were in that weird financial aid bracket where didn't make enough financial aid, but also didn't make, it was, what I'm talking about, we just didn't get financial aid because it was in the middle. So it was a lot of hard work, but I'm super proud of my parents' emotional support and my friendships that I did have, and being able to experiment and knowing that it was okay to take my own route and not feeling forced to take the traditional route. I did take a quarter off because I just couldn't do it. I was exhausted, I was burnt out, and it took a lot for me to realize I felt that imposter syndrome that Joe mentioned. I felt like a fraud, and I was like, should I be here? Should I have done CC first? Should I have done a Cal State? But ultimately it was believing in myself and really making my parents proud and realizing my why. So that was a little bit about my experience as a first generation college student.
I can hop in next. I had to think on this question for a hot minute. I think, to echo Itzy, I think for me, my experience, at least in my first 2 years at UC Irvine, it was challenging in the sense of getting used to the rigor of the courses, transitioning, the overall transition to the university. My parents were able to support me in getting there, but once I was there, it was well, you know how to do it, right? And it's wait, no. So I think the first 2 years were a challenge in that sense. I think also I was living those 2 years with undiagnosed depression, and so I think for my family, as well as I'm sure for many folks in the space, we just, in our families, we don't talk about mental health, or there's no, like the language isn't quite there for mental health, or like to really accurately or maybe pinpoint like what we're feeling or what we're going through. And so I think for me, that hugely impacted my abilities, not only to communicate with my family, but I think definitely impacted my ability in navigating the university. I also didn't know that there were counseling services at a university level. So FYI, in case you all didn't know, that service is there for you all to access for free. And I think that's something that I wish I had known back then, and I didn't quite understand at the time. I will say though that I think once I was able to understand how my first gen identity impacted my experience at UC Irvine, I think it allowed me to really find my people and find my community. And I know we're not on the advice part of the panel or questioning yet, but I think the one piece of advice I might offer for you all is really finding your people. And I think that it also is comforting in a sense of when I realized how much I was struggling, and I realized okay, I need to look for support somewhere. It made me feel empowered to find people who were experiencing the same thing. And so I'm happy to see you all in this space today. I hope you all will continue to access these resources in different shapes and forms, because I think that for me was really pivotal in, I think, transforming my own college career, as well as my educational journeys, and being able to figure out how what I wanted to do with my career path, was one, embracing, I think, my full identities and what I'm going through. But then I think it's Brene Brown. I don't know if folks know Brene Brown, but I think just having that vulnerability and that full understanding of who we are, and being okay with being vulnerable, which I know it's easy to say, harder to do, right? But I think really leaning into that vulnerability for me was really pivotal, I think, in transforming my college career. And again, similar as Itzy, it was a challenge. I was also working a couple jobs and navigating family needs versus my own desires. I also moved away for grad school when I moved to San Francisco, which I know we don't talk about it as often, but definitely first gen grad students, that's also a real thing too, of getting a higher degree. So if you all want to talk about that later, we totally can. But again, I think that it all just definitely played a role in my journey, but I also wouldn't take any of that away or take that back. So I'd think back, and it's I'd repeat it. I do the same things the same way I did it before. But yeah, I think that I would say is my overall experience as a first gen student.
Thank you, Kristin. Yeah, I definitely can echo and kind of in some ways empathize what Itzy and Kristin shared. I do know that my experience as a UCSB first generation Filipinx American impacted and shaped the way who I am today, and also my career choices. And so if I can shape the, kind of put a narrative to my experience at UCSB, it was a journey in 3 parts. The first part is in my first 2 years where, I struggled, finding myself. And can you imagine, I think, I don't know how many of you can relate to this, but, as a high school student, I excelled in every place. I could go to, academically, I was salutatorian in my class of 300. So academics came easy to me. But I came here, and all of a sudden this joy of being able to come to college, because that was a pinnacle of my success at that point in time, my parents, and to realize that, oh shoot, I don't think I belong here. Like that imposter syndrome, because all of a sudden, when I was getting straight A's in high school, all of a sudden here's I got my first F. At one point I had a 0.9 GPA. And so all of a sudden it's do I belong here? I didn't know how to, the manager's academic rigor. It was so fast. The food sucked. All of a sudden it's oh wow, the first couple weeks is oh, it's cool, it's different. But now all of a sudden I miss my mom's cooking. I miss, so I had to find my own comfort food in the residence hall, the cafeteria, my eggs and rice, tomatoes, eggs and rice. That was my comfort food. And it didn't help when you had some hallmates just, who would tell you, and it was predominantly white back then, tell you, it's you took my friend's spot, right? You got into UCSB because of affirmative action. And so those kind of reminders kind of gives you that sense like I don't belong here. So all of a sudden you start doubting yourself. All of a sudden it's like, how come, I excelled in high school, all of a sudden here it's like I felt like I lost my brain. It's like all of a sudden I don't know what I was doing. And so I struggled for a bit. I'd go to class, like understanding why I went to class. And then the second journey is finding myself. I think with all the struggles, come to embrace, like Kristin said, my people, right? So I think part of that, so I started taking Asian American studies classes. I started becoming more involved with Kapatirang Filipino and Asian American activism. So my third and fourth year, that's when I really felt like I found myself through Asian American studies, understanding my history as a Filipino American, and then how I relate in this world. And so, to that point, being different, and frankly, to this point, still, something negative experience. But to that point, being different was a negative thing. Growing up, I was bullied for my fresh off the boat accent, right? And so that led me to stuttering. That led me to not speaking in public and not being sure of who I am. And so by understanding myself, my history, and then also being around people who understood me, developing those leadership skills, not just in classes, but also like, in the student activism, I think that got me the confidence that I have today. So that period, I think was a start of the journey of where I am today, understanding myself and providing the confidence. So the same negative things that people told me about before, I realized I flipped that. They become an asset to me now. So as a first generation Filipinx American, Filipino American immigrant, I have a unique perspective in the world. And so that I take that as a point of pride, not something as a deficit, but something that like I can add to the conversation. And as a leader of an organization, to me, the community values that I hold, the way I lead, that come from my experience. So of course, the third part of the journey is graduating. That was my parents' dream. But even that, there's a story. I finished my coursework in 5 years, but there was one requirement that I didn't meet, which is language. I didn't know that for UC system, they're supposed to take like 3 years of Spanish or 3 years of foreign language in high school. I took 2. So I never really quite fulfilled that. And knowing that I wasn't going to go to grad school at that point in time, I'd say, you know what, who cares about the diploma? But I owed it to my parents to complete that. So I challenged a language proficiency course, and it was more like a test. And in 1997, I completed that. So that's my journey in 3 parts, and it shaped me today.
Thank you for sharing. So the next question is what is one piece of advice you want to share for the students?
There's so much. I feel like the most important thing is not being afraid to like step out of your comfort zone. I think a lot of us come in with an idea of like, this is what I'm going to do. This is how it's going to go. And you need to allow yourself to be a little flexible because you never know who you'll meet, what you'll cross paths with. I know someone approached me at the Arbor about joining the newspaper, and I was like, okay, I'll go. I think mostly because there was free food, but I ended up falling in love, and that was the way that it was my creative outlet. Although I couldn't do communication and media broadcasting, I was a writer, a staff writer, and I went to concerts. It was really fun, and it was just that opportunity that I didn't think I would have. And now until this day, I have it on my resume, and it's helped get a lot of the positions that I've had. So I think definitely knowing that you don't have to stick to a specific timeline or a certain mold. It's your journey and it's specific to you. And I would say with that, I think setting boundaries as well. I didn't learn this until maybe my third year, I had a very traumatic like roommate experience, and I didn't know how to ask for help. But I think asking for help and setting those boundaries really was a pivotal point in my college career. I moved out, I moved downtown where I was away from IV. So you have to do what you got to do to succeed. And sometimes it feels good to like follow the lead and follow what everyone else is doing. I know my first year I rushed for a sorority and it felt so wrong. And I was like, this is not for me. So kind of admitting that to yourself and taking time to reflect on what it is that you want and how you're feeling and checking in with yourself. Like Kristin said, your mental health is so important. So yeah, just set those boundaries and don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and maybe visit your professor's office hours, make new friends. There's so many opportunities. There's resources. I know I would apply for certain scholarships and they would give you like free money. Like you would just write this essay and it was amazing. And I'm like, why isn't anybody talking about this? EOP is a great resource. And the Multicultural Center, I learned so much programming from working there because unfortunately I didn't learn about them till I was on my way out of college, but there was free programming that empowered who I am because I felt like it was a predominantly white school, and I felt my parents are Central American. I was born in Nicaragua, and I felt like I wasn't Latina enough. I wasn't Mexican, but I wasn't white enough. So I felt like I didn't belong. But once like it's been reiterated, like finding your people and finding your value and just your why and why you're there is definitely going to shape you and really help your college career.
So, to students, some people might tell you you don't belong here. Don't believe that. You belong here. You're good enough to meet the requirements, and you are top of the top. So I want to say that. But I think the advice that I could give you is maximize the use of university resources. And Itzy already said that. There's so many folks at the university who wants to help you out. There's so many different resources. That challenge that I had was I didn't have that mindset to maximize resources. Even when help was offered to me, again, as a high school student, I excelled. And so when help was offered, I felt like, well, because of my ego and my experience, like, well, I don't need that. And so it wasn't so much that my grades failing, it wasn't because I was dumb. I had that, but it was because I didn't know how to study. I didn't know how to manage my time. I didn't know how to accept help. And so, know how the university works, go to EOP, find your mentors, find your people, go to office hours, go visit all the, virtually of course now, but go visit all the different offices at the university, befriend those folks, because before you even need them. So let them know, you befriend those folks at the front desk, because they'll tell you things that they're probably not going to tell a lot of people. So my advice is, you're good enough, but you've got to maximize the use of resources.
Thank you, Joe.
All right, I guess I'm next on the list. I think Itzy and Joe have already touched upon a lot of advice I was planning on giving, so forgive me if I'm repeating some of it. But I think it's also worth repeating, right? I think, I think one of the biggest that I shared before was finding your people, whether it's connecting with EOP or ONDAS, connecting with other student orgs on campus. I think that was really key in my personal student experience and my own overall journey in higher ed. And so I can't tell you how many times I sincerely appreciated the friends that I met, the mentors I had that helped me get through my time both in undergrad and grad school. I think the second piece of advice, what was it? I think it was leaning into your vulnerabilities, as well as leaning into what you already know to be true. And I think I always share this with folks who are asking for advice, where it's feel free to take what works for you and feel free to leave the rest. And I say that coming from a place of, we all come with our advice of coming from different perspectives and different life experiences. And so I always return it back to students, or I always return it back to you all and saying well, you all know your needs best. You all know your body's best, your experiences best. And so I encourage you all, kind of along the lines of what Itzy was sharing too, of really having a self-awareness or understanding of yourself and your journey, and your needs, as well as your why. I think, again, kind of reiterating what Itzy was saying of there are going to be times during UCSB as well as beyond where it's going to be challenging and where it's going to be classes are going to be hard. I mean, we're in the middle of COVID time, so that's adding another layer of challenge to all of this, right? So I would encourage you all to return to your why and hopefully get a little more grounded in your why for why you're here, why you want to get your degree, what you want to get out of your time at UCSB, because then I think you'll be able to make the best choices for yourself and honor what feels good for you all. But yeah, that would be my solid pieces of advice.
Thank you, Kristin. And thank you for all the panelists for their advice. If there's any students who would like to ask questions to our three panelists, feel free to unmute yourself or send it in the chat. In the meantime, though, Joe, you mentioned a lot about imposter syndrome. Can you define what that is to the students, please?
It's probably not the academic definition, but I can tell you my experience is feeling like you're not good enough. So I feel like, you're in a situation, it could be like in a meeting and people were like, or in a class, we're like, wow, everyone's, I don't even know what they're talking about. It's like, I feel inadequate. Like, I feel like I don't belong here. So that to me, that's this imposter syndrome. Like, I feel like I'm gonna be afraid of being found out. Maybe they are right that I don't belong here. Maybe people are right that I don't know enough about, academics. Maybe I'm dumb. Those all those feelings were like, yeah, you know what? I know I'm here, but I think I'm gonna find out that I'm not good enough to be in this space. And so that starts doubt. It's part of this self-imposed, but then all of a sudden, like, it doesn't help. It's that people are telling you that you don't belong. And so those things could spiral downward, if you don't get out of that,
Thank you for sharing. So I actually have another question for you guys. Were there any obstacles you faced as a first generation individual in your work position? I'd like to open that to any panelist.
I think I can share a little bit with like work position and like maybe even job hunt process. And this, I feel like this kind of ties into like my experience as a first gen like grad student, because I think if you all decide to pursue an advanced degree, I think the challenge that I faced with my family and my parents was kind of like, I'm sorry, why? Like just not maybe having the understanding of like, this is what my advanced degree is for and why I want to do it. It was also in San Francisco, so they're like, and I'm from Orange County, so they're like, double why, like where, why? So I think that anxiety was kind of coming up for my family. But I think like one of the struggles I had as a first gen, like even in working in an office setting, like neither of my parents have really worked in an office setting before. And so when I was fresh out of grad school and applying for jobs, there was just so many like questions and things that I didn't know about when applying for jobs and even sitting in interviews. So something that I would also offer for you all is visiting career services when you're able and ready to. I think they offer really great, which again, I didn't take advantage of when I was an undergrad, but I think they give really great advice on like how to tailor your resumes, what are some interview skills to have, what kinds of questions to ask in an interview. A lot of that, I luckily had mentors in my graduate program who were able to kind of coach me through it and walk me through some of the processes. But I think even just navigating, like, just what does it mean to sit in an interview? Like, how do I present myself? Like, what I think they're at UC Irvine, I think they used to in their career center, they used to film you doing an interview. And I remember at the time thinking like, oh, heck no, like, I don't want to see myself on film. Which like, it's interesting now being in Zoom. It's like I'm watching myself on film all the time, or on camera all the time. So I would say like the biggest challenge for me, at least in the workforce as a first gen college student, is I think just navigating like being in an office job for one, and being in a place where like neither of my parents have ever really worked. And so they also were like, well, I don't know, like they also didn't have as much guidance, I think. So I another piece of advice, in addition to checking out career services, would be, I think, tapping into those mentors who would be able to walk you through some of these things, or give you some insight as to like, yeah, maybe this is something you might want to think about versus this, would be something to consider, and that I offer to you all.
Thank you for your insight.
Something that came up for me while Kristin was talking was my fear of like my sociology major not being good enough, or like not being, like if I was applying for a marketing position, why would they hire me? But there's so much benefit to, unless you're like a bio and you're going to be a doctor, like the humanities majors, you're able to take courses in the things that you're very interested in. So I took a sociology class about media. So I think the way you tailor and the way you present that into your resume and your interviews really speaks volumes. I know that I went to career services a lot, but there was also classes, like in my applied psychology class, I took a whole career. One of the requirements was a career class, and you learned how to apply for your dream position and interview. And before that class, I was thinking, well, I'm going to need a ton of internships in marketing if I want to take that route. But it's just the way you sell yourself and pitch yourself, and the work that you do on your own, like the bottom line, the newspaper was part of it. And I think that you shouldn't just limit yourself because of your major. And that's just what I'll share.
I'm in IT. My major is political science and Asian American studies. So early on, it's like, what the heck am I going to do with that? But really now in my position in a leadership role, and I think moving forward, upward, those, my identity and understanding how the world works has actually given me the edge over someone who's just a techie. I obviously have that, but I think just understanding, how politics work, how organizational dynamics work, and my sense of identity does have helped. So the question was, as a first gen, what were some of your work experience struggle? For me, it's the lack of finding mentors and possibly models that I could resonate with. Growing up, all I saw, principal, president, it's all white males, and as a person of color, first generation immigrant, I didn't know, that it's even possible, to be a leader. And again, it's just looking back and now it's like, oh, that was a dumb idea. But again, growing up, I didn't see someone that looks like me or I can relate with. So the two people that really kind of got me interested in, the idea that leadership isn't just one thing is, first one is a person named Keiko Inoue, who unfortunately passed away in the 1990s. But this is probably 4'11" Japanese American woman mentor of mine, and she was EOP director at that point. She showed me that there's different ways to lead. You don't have to be this 6-foot white male, assertive. The way she led to me was like, oh shit, I've never seen that before. But everyone respected her. She never had to raise her voice. And when she talked, people listened. So to me, that introduced like, maybe there's different, groups, different types of leadership. The second one was Dr. Michael Young, who was African American. He was the former vice chancellor for student affairs at UCSB. So again, I didn't have any API, mentors. There weren't any. So, but Dr. Young really, his charisma, the way he took me in, the way he dealt with people, even in difficult situations, he always had respect for others. He always maintained the dignity across negotiating table. Mind you, I was a student activist at that point in time, and he was sitting across from me. But he always afforded me that respect, the dignity as a student leader. He never looked down upon me. And as a matter of fact, that's the reason how I got my job after graduation, was because of my experience with him. So for me, it was the lack of possibility models, the lack of role models, people who look like me. Again, it doesn't have to be an Asian American, it doesn't have to be an American. It's just people who I could resonate with.
Thank you for all the great insight. Actually, we have reached the end of our panel discussion, unless there's any more questions. But I would like to thank all 3 panelists, Joe, Kristin, and Itzy. You guys are great. I really appreciate taking your time to being with us. And I'm going to do a quick little shout out because we have more workshops after today, after the session. At 4 p.m., we have to get to know your first gen students, where we have panelists that currently go to UCSB to give you insight. And at 5 p.m., we have get to know your first gen alumni and graduate students that have a lot of information about undergrad, and it should be really cool workshops and panels. But thank you so much for coming, and we really appreciate you having here. And welcome to UCSB, and have a great day.